Hello readers, I'm Amy, and today we're just gonna do a little half-wrapped. Half-wrapped started because I was tired of doing full month wrap-ups, especially when I had like 17 books to talk about and couldn't remember them. So, if you need a refresher on everything, books that I've read that have standalone reviews will not be featured in the half-wrapped reviews. So we're just gonna talk about some of these books. If I seem a little tired, I just got back from work, but I haven't really filmed much lately, and I need to do that. So let's start off with She Who Became the Sun. This was released this month? Last month. This was released at some point and I talked about it in one of my release videos. July 20th it must have been. Anyways, She Who Became the Sun. Fun fact, the cover artist who did this book actually also did the Poppy War series, which I can see the similarity in style, but this has like a lot more color than the Poppy War. But I enjoyed this. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. It's very much a military fantasy, and even fantasy is stretching it a little bit. Like, there is a slight fantastical element, but it's a small thing. It's part of a kind of tradition within the dynasties, and it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't play a big part, but it's not something that just anybody can have or try to learn. It's just kind of, you have it or you don't. But it is very militaristic, and the plot didn't really get me that much. It starts off interesting. It's kind of Mulan-ish. At the beginning, you have a girl who's told that she's nothing, and her brother's going to be great, and then her brother dies, and she tries to take over her destiny. So in that, we're also playing a lot with genders, which I think was really well done. And while I wasn't super invested in the plot necessarily and wasn't really into the military elements, the characters really made this book for me. The characters were just so complex and phenomenal. We have several characters who are playing different roles with their gender, trying to be more masculine, trying to prove themselves. And here we do have a eunuch who is dealing with being a forced eunuch and kind of trying to be hyper masculine. And some of the relationships between characters, like, I don't usually ship characters that aren't canon, but I shipped some of these characters hard because it's like, you work so well together. If you could just get over your like toxic masculinity issues or whatever identity issues, then like you could be a great couple. Just there were a lot of complex, wonderful characters. There is a sex scene towards like somewhere in the second half of this that is very queer and awesome. And not reading a ton of erotic books, I have not come across a scene anything like this. So if you're looking for your queer sex moment, this book has it. Next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about Fledgling. I think it's been over a month since I finished this book, but I've done enough standalone reviews lately that I haven't really had to do a half-wrapped. Fledgling is the last book published by Octavia Butler. It is a vampire book. If you know me, you know I love myself a vampire story. I don't see anyone on BookTube talking about this. BookTube loves Octavia Butler, but they don't talk about Fledgling. And I'm like, this is the vampire book from Octavia Butler. It's going to be the one that I start with. This is my first Octavia Butler read. It's kind of a history and is just exploring kind of the different ways that the author has set up these communities. So you have male vampires and female vampires living separately because of how they feel around mating rituals and how those matings make them act like they just feel a need to be kind of separate. And you have this girl who appears to be a child, but is actually like 53 years old, and she's trying to find out whatever she can about her past, because it's what is it, traumatic amnesia, where she doesn't remember anything that happened to her that led to her being where she is. And everyone's like, how can you not know this stuff? You were raised with this vampire like coven. You should, or what, it's not called a coven, it's called something. But you're raised with all these vampires, you should know the answer to these questions. And she just doesn't. There is one part of this that freaked me out a little bit, and that's some of the sexual relationships that she has. Actually, all of the sexual relationships she has are with older people, but like they're not older. So, as I said, she's 53 years old, and the people she has sex with are all adults, and she is technically an adult, but she has the appearance of a 12-year-old child. So I'm not clear on how I feel about those relationships, but to each their own. They are all adults in this series, technically speaking. So, or not in this series, in this book. You can tell I'm very, very tired right now. 5th season. I read this already last year. And this is part of a series of 3 books. And by the time I got around to starting the 2nd book, I couldn't remember anything. I didn't remember who anyone was, what anything was. So I decided to reread this. This is actually the first reread I have done in a long time. And I loved it even more than the first time I read it. The first time through was kind of difficult because I wasn't used to Jemison's writing style. And I love her writing. But it's very much something that I had to kind of warm up to. And in reading this the 2nd time around, I really feel like I was more invested in it because I kind of already knew the story. I did finally start on the Obelisk Gate. I'm actually kind of buddy reading with a friend who is just ahead of me in the series. So I'm excited to talk about that with him. But I'm loving this, and I like where the 2nd book is going so far. I'm also going to talk about Lightning Flowers. I started this months ago and just recently finished. I did film a standalone review for this, but I think I lost it or deleted it or something. Lightning Flowers by Catherine E. Standifer. This one really hit me close to the heart. I've been comparing this to Omnivore's Dilemma, because in Omnivore's Dilemma you have this person who, the author is going through all of these different ways that food goes from farm to table, whether it's through McDonald's or through foraging or through Whole Foods. Lightning Flowers is going through mines in different countries and different like hospitals, supply places, and talking about how do you get from metal in rock to the metal in your body. And she has an ICD. I don't remember what that stands for, but it's basically to help manage heart attacks and stuff. And she's very connected to nature. I believe she was living in Wyoming at the start of this book. It kind of goes back and forth on different timelines, so if you're not into that, that might be a problem. I really like that, so it didn't bother me with this book. But she's very connected to nature, and suddenly she can't live out there in nature anymore, because if she goes on like a 12-mile hike into the woods, there's not going to be a doctor around to help her if she has heart problems, and it changes her entire life. And she gets to thinking, is my life worth all the damage caused to make metal? And I don't know that it is. This gets into that very complex philosophical question of, is it okay if one person dies if it'll save millions? And I don't know that there is an answer to that question. I think everyone very much has their own answer. But it really got me to thinking. I'll try and link my scoliosis video up here. But if you weren't aware, I have a titanium rod in my spine. It's actually the 2nd rod that I've gotten. And this book just had me thinking, like, what went into making that titanium rod that essentially saved my life and helped me to be healthy and to be where I'm at now? Like, yeah, it saved my life, so great, but think of all of the damage that creating that metal rod has done, because you have these companies that mine from towns, and I really wish I'd saved the full review because I need more than 2 minutes to talk about this. But you have this company that goes to like a town in Madagascar, and they're like, oh, we're gonna like replant trees and stuff. We're gonna have this environmentally friendly plan to try and help replace what we take out. And eventually they just stop putting money into that program. And they don't have a way to confirm, like, if the people are from that town or if they're from a nearby village. So people from that town will be like, we're not getting enough jobs because they just happen to be hiring people from other villages. And it's this whole complex thing about the environmental impact of creating medical devices. And as much as I enjoyed this book, it also made me cry. And if you have any kind of medical trauma, just be very careful, tread carefully with this book, because it hits you hard. And towards the end, she's also talking about like problems with insurance and getting coverage, and like, did she make the right decisions, because different doctors have different opinions on things. I think everyone should read this, but it is very heart-wrenching, so just be aware of that. This is a nonfiction memoir, if I didn't already mention that. Then we have Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf. I've heard of this book, but I have never once found a print copy of it, and they had one copy at Barnes & Noble last time I went, so I did go ahead and purchase it. It's not really a graphic novel because of all the words and stuff, but like, it has a lot of art and stuff in it, and it's basically each chapter, it's like 2 or 3 pages, talks about a different month of the year and the happenings, like the deaths and stuff around the werewolf at that time. And honestly, I was bored. It's very, very short. It's just, there could have been a lot done with this, and it just didn't go very deep in exploring some of the characters and some of the stories and stuff. Like, when you think Stephen King, you think the guy needs to edit himself down. And this is almost too edited. Like, it just needs more substance, more meat to it. So definitely not my favorite Stephen King story. And lastly, we have this tiny little kind of pamphlet on witches, midwives, and nurses. So this is a quick little history. History tends to take me a while to read through because it's not always, like, history is interesting, but I'd rather like learn about it amongst other people or watch a documentary or a short clip. Reading books that are very historical, very hit and miss for me, but I did enjoy this, and I liked how quick and digestible it was, so it wasn't like this big thing. But Witches, Midwives, and Nurses is basically talking about the medical history, or the history of women healers, like it says on the front. It kind of starts out with witches and how they were, it starts off talking about witches and how people were really prejudiced against them and women's medicine in general, and eventually it kind of evolves into midwifery, which was largely taken care of by women while men were starting to take care of like surgeries and other medical things. And then we get to nursing today. And throughout this whole thing, it's very much a discussion of the class system. So you have rich men who have politicians on their side, who have economists on their side. They have all of the big important people being like, you're a man, you can do whatever. And they didn't actually have any more knowledge than the women healers did, really. Like, a lot of these guys that we learn about in this book admit that everything they know about medicine is from the women healers around them. But because they're men with money and they're friends with politicians, they get priority and they start to push women out of the field. And eventually you come to nurses who are phenomenal people. My mother's a nurse. Like, they're the ones who take care of everything. The doctor is in there for the diagnosis, might be there for the surgery, and then he's gone. But he's the important one, even though it's the nurses who do all of the work. And it's just this short history of, here's how we got here today. It sucks. And this is actually a reprint. I believe this was originally published in the 70s. But for the most part, this still very much holds true to today. And I think this could have been written today, really. So if you're looking for like a quick little history on women healers, definitely check this out. It was worth the read. So that is going to be it for my little mini wrap up. Again, sorry I am tired. Sorry I'm not filming as much lately. I've got like 3 jobs and full-time school. So it is what it is. But I love you all. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.